interesting sentiment. Drake Keeler of IX Basketball made an X post that read, Kurt Miller said he's already received more calls about potential trades for the number one pick in the upcoming draft than he did in the lead up to the 2025 draft. So teams
are already calling. Multiple teams. And they're not calling about just any draft pick. They're calling about the number one overall selection in the 2026 WNBA draft. Dallas Wings GM Kurt Miller just revealed something fascinating. He's received more trade inquiries for this year's number one pick than he did before either of the last two drafts. And when he explained why, he name-dropped Caitlin Clark. That tells us everything we need to know about how franchise-altering players change the entire calculation around draft assets.
There was not going to be a trade. Paige was not going to be traded, but it will be interesting, and it makes our job fun to listen to those calls that come in for the number one pick, and we'll do what's best for our franchise. So teams are calling about the number one pick more so this year than in the past, because when the Indiana Fever got the number one pick, there was no point in you calling the Indiana Fever. They were never trading away the number one pick, which was Caitlin Clark. That pick.
Listen to what Miller actually said. When the Indiana Fever had the number one pick in 2024, nobody bothered calling. Why would they? Everyone knew Caitlin Clark was going first overall, and there was zero chance Indiana would trade that pick. Same story in 2025, when Dallas had the top selection. Paige Bueckers was the obvious choice, and Miller's phone stayed quiet. But now teams are circling because this draft doesn't have that one undeniable generational talent. And that uncertainty creates opportunity. The draft lottery results came in on November 23rd, giving Dallas their second consecutive number one pick. They'll choose between UConn's Azzi Fudd, USC's Kiki Iriafen, UCLA's Lauren Betts, Notre Dame's Olivia Miles, and several other talented prospects. But here's what makes this situation different from the previous 2 years.
Let's take a look at this here. See, even in this mock draft, so there's a mock draft here on ESPN, right? And even in this mock draft, they have the Dallas Wings taking Azzi Fudd with the number one overall pick. Now, I do like Azzi Fudd. She has gotten better to me. I didn't know. She definitely started shooting the ball. I saw her shoot the ball off the dribble a little bit better. But for the most part, she's a catch and shoot, knockdown shoot.
The ESPN mock draft already has Dallas taking Azzi Fudd first overall. Makes sense on paper. She's Paige Bueckers' former UConn teammate and girlfriend, and reuniting them in Dallas would create instant chemistry and probably sell a lot of tickets. Fudd's shooting has improved significantly this season. She's showing better off-the-dribble creation, though she's still primarily a catch-and-shoot specialist. But Minnesota gets the number 2 pick, and they're positioned to draft Kiki Iriafen. Think about that roster for a second. Nafisa Collier, Alana Smith, Courtney Williams, Kayla McBride, and Bridget Carlton already form one of the league's most complete cores. Add a versatile forward like Iriafen who can score from multiple levels. That's not just a playoff team. That's a legitimate championship contender immediately. Seattle picks third, and Olivia Miles makes perfect sense there. Pair her with Jewel Lloyd in the backcourt, and suddenly the Storm have their point guard of the future running alongside one of the league's premier scorers. That's a foundation you can build around for the next decade.
But I'm not like super sold on Azzi Fudd as the number 1 pick, but Dallas Wings, it makes sense. Our fam would make the most sense to me. Lauren Betts would make some. I'm not a Lauren Betts guy either, by the way. So, but I get it if they do it. You want to get a big, I get it. Me personally, I would go our fam over Lauren Betts any day of the week. I personally like Flau'jae more than Azzi Fudd, but it is.
Washington gets the 4th pick in this mock, and they're slotted to take Lauren Betts. Here's where it gets interesting. Betts is a 7-foot center who dominates in the paint, but does she fit next to Aaliyah Edwards, who Washington already has developing? Edwards is physical, can score inside, and showed real promise as a rookie. Adding another traditional big might create spacing issues, rather than solve them. Then Chicago picks 5th, and the mock has them selecting Sonia Citron from Notre Dame. But here's what nobody's talking about. How does Angel Reese fit into any of this? The relationship between Reese and the Sky organization deteriorated rapidly after her public comments about the team. Once she aired those grievances, the front office essentially moved on mentally. You don't bring in another young forward prospect and still plan to build around Reese. Something has to give.
You have to take her, but I don't love Lauren Betts next to Kiki Iriafen. And I like the other big they got. She wear the red hair sometime. Light-skinned chick with the tattoos. I just blanked on her name. My apologies. But she's nice. But I mean, if Lauren Betts is there at 6'7", I guess you got to take her. Flau'jae, see. Now, the Chicago Sky have to get rid of Angel Reese. You can't bring in Flau'jae Johnson and still have Angel Reese when we know they don't really click like that anymore.
Which brings us to the real intrigue here. Multiple teams are calling Dallas about trading for that #1 pick. So who's calling? And more importantly, what are they offering? Chicago makes the most sense as an aggressive suitor. They have the 5th pick in this draft. Plus they have Angel Reese, a player who won Rookie of the Year in 2024 but whose relationship with the organization is clearly fractured. Could Chicago package Reese in the 5th pick to move up to #1? That would solve multiple problems simultaneously. Dallas gets an established young player who just averaged a double-double as a rookie. Plus they still get a top 5 selection. Chicago gets a fresh start with their choice of prospect and moves on from a situation that's become untenable. The math works. The motivation exists on both sides. And it would explain why Miller is suddenly fielding so many calls when he didn't get any the previous 2 years. But there's another team that should be making calls. Minnesota. The Lynx have the 2nd pick, which likely means Kiki Iriafen. But what if they want Azzi Fudd instead? What if they believe Fudd's shooting and scoring ability fits their system better than Iriafen's versatility? Minnesota could offer Dallas a package built around future picks, maybe a veteran player, and the 2nd overall selection. Dallas moves down 1 spot, still gets an elite prospect in Iriafen, and adds assets to continue building.
I wouldn't be surprised if Chicago are trying to trade Angel Reese for the #1 pick. The Chicago Sky are probably trying to pair Angel Reese and not this #5 pick, but Angel Reese and another pick for the #1 pick. Send Angel Reese to Dallas, get him another pick, or send Angel Reese and #5 to Dallas, and you get the #1 pick. Something, I don't know, but I think the Chicago Sky are definitely one of the teams putting in calls.
Now let's talk about why this matters beyond just draft positioning. The WNBA is entering a critical expansion phase. The league is adding teams, which means expansion drafts are coming. Having multiple high-value assets, whether that's draft picks or young players on rookie contracts, gives you protection and flexibility. If Dallas trades the #1 pick for Angel Reese and Chicago's 5th pick, they suddenly have 2 lottery talents under team control for years. That's valuable not just for building a contender, but for having assets to protect or leverage during expansion. Same logic applies if they trade down with Minnesota and accumulate future picks. The Caitlin Clark comparison Miller made reveals the real calculation here. Clark was untradeable not just because of her talent, but because of her cultural impact and revenue generation. She transformed Indiana's franchise valuation overnight. Paige Bueckers has similar star power, maybe not quite at Clark's stratospheric level, but she's a proven draw with a massive following.
To try to get rid of Angel Reese. Here it says Toronto Tempo getting Tania Latson, Cody McMahon, Gianna Neepkins. Okay, they don't have that girl from Maryland in here no more. Good, because she stinks. Kiki Rice, I'm not sold. I'm not sold. But this is very, very interesting here, man. Get down in the comments. Let me know what y'all think about this.
But none of the 2026 prospects have that same profile yet. Azzi Fudd is talented and has name recognition from UConn, but she's not bringing Clark-level attention. Kiki Iriafen is extremely skilled, but doesn't have the national media presence. Lauren Betts dominates college games, but hasn't captured mainstream attention outside of basketball circles. Olivia Miles has the potential, but she's still building back from injury concerns. That lack of an obvious transcendent prospect is exactly what makes this pick tradable. Miller isn't holding a golden ticket like Indiana had with Clark, or like Dallas had with Bueckers. He's holding a valuable asset in a relatively balanced draft class, and that's when smart GMs start listening to offers. The other factor nobody's discussing, Dallas already has Paige Bueckers. They have their franchise cornerstone locked in. Adding Azzi Fudd creates a dynamic duo. Sure, but it's not essential to their long-term success the way getting that first star was. Dallas can afford to be creative here, because they're building around an established foundation rather than searching for one. Here's what makes this entire situation fascinating from a league-wide perspective. The WNBA has never had this level of draft capital intrigue before. Historically, teams with top picks either took the obvious choice or made relatively minor trades. But we're seeing front offices get more sophisticated, more willing to make bold moves. more comfortable with asset management strategies that the NBA has used for decades. Kurt Miller specifically mentioning Caitlin Clark in this context wasn't accidental. He's signaling to other teams that he understands the difference between untouchable generational talents and valuable but tradable assets. He's telling the league that his phone is on and he's willing to listen. That's smart business. Think about what happened with Clark in Indiana. The Fever went from league afterthought to must-watch television overnight. They sold out arenas. They broke viewership records. Clark's rookie season generated more revenue and attention than anyone predicted. That's the kind of impact that makes a pick completely untradeable. You're not just drafting a player, you're transforming your entire franchise economics. Paige Bueckers will have a similar effect in Dallas, though probably not quite as extreme. She's already driving ticket sales and merchandise interest before playing a single WNBA game. Dallas made the right call keeping that pick and taking her first overall in But this year, this is different. Azzi Fudd is good, potentially great, but she's not restructuring the league's economic landscape. Same with Iria Finn, Betts, Miles and the rest of this class. They're excellent basketball players who will have productive WNBA careers. Several will probably make all-star team, but none of them are bringing what Clark brought or what Bueckers brings. So Dallas has options. They can take Fudd and build the UConn reunion storyline with Bueckers. That has real marketing appeal and could create an elite backcourt for years. Or they can trade the pick, get multiple assets back and accelerate their rebuild in a different way. The Chicago scenario remains the most logical. Angel Reese averaged 13.6 points and 13.1 rebounds as a rookie in 20. Those are elite numbers. Yes, her relationship with the Sky deteriorated, but that doesn't erase her talent. If Dallas can acquire Reese plus the 5th pick, they get an immediate contributor who pairs well with Bueckers' skill set. Plus, they still get a lottery talent like Sonia Citron or whoever they prefer at 5. For Chicago, moving Reese and dropping from 5 to 1 lets them draft their preferred prospect and start fresh. Maybe they want Fudd shooting. Maybe they prefer Iria Finn's versatility if Minnesota takes Fudd. Either way, they get to build around a new young core without the baggage of the Reese situation. The Minnesota angle is more speculative, but still plausible. If the Lynx are convinced that Fudd is a better fit than Iria Finn, they might offer Dallas a future first-round pick plus the 2nd overall selection. Dallas drops one spot, takes Iria Finn, and banks an extra first-rounder for future flexibility. Minnesota gets their preferred prospect. Both teams win. What makes this even more interesting is the expansion draft factor. The WNBA is adding teams, which means existing rosters will lose players. Having multiple young players on rookie contracts gives you options. You can protect your core and still have valuable pieces to offer in trades. You can absorb the loss of a veteran because you have young talent developing. Asset accumulation becomes crucial in an expansion environment. Dallas understands that. Miller has been a GM and coach long enough to think 3 moves ahead. If he can turn one premium asset into 2 or 3 quality assets, he's creating roster flexibility that pays dividends for years. And here's the thing about Paige Bueckers that changes everything for Dallas. She's good enough that they don't need to nail this pick. Obviously they want to maximize value, but they're not desperate. Indiana needed Caitlin Clark to be everything she became because they had nothing else. Dallas already has their star. Now they're just optimizing around her. That's why Miller can field these calls with genuine interest rather than just listening politely and hanging up. He's not protecting a franchise-altering asset like Indiana would. He's evaluating trade scenarios to see if any offer improves his team more than taking Fudd would. The next few months leading up to the April draft will reveal which teams are serious. Chicago makes too much sense to ignore. Minnesota has the assets and motivation if they strongly prefer one prospect over another. Don't sleep on Washington either. They have the 4th pick and could package it with other pieces to move up if they're convinced Fudd or Iria Finn is their missing piece. What we're witnessing is the WNBA draft market maturing. Front offices are getting more aggressive, more creative, more willing to make bold moves. The Clark and Bueckers situations taught everyone that generational talents are untouchable, but it also taught them that everything else is negotiable. So will Dallas actually trade the pick? Miller said they'll do what's best for the franchise, which is GM speak for we're listening to offer. My read is that they'll take calls right up until draft night, evaluate every serious proposal, and ultimately make a decision based on whether any offer clearly exceeds the value of just taking Fudd. If Chicago offers Reese in the 5th pick, that's compelling. If Minnesota throws in a future first to swap picks, that's worth considering. But if the offers don't wow them, they'll happily take Fudd, market the UConn reunion with Bueckers, and build one of the league's most exciting young backcourt. Either way, the fact that we're even having this conversation shows how much the league has evolved. 3 years ago, nobody was making aggressive plays for top picks. Now teams are calling before the lottery balls even cool off. That's progress. That's front offices treating draft assets with the sophistication they deserve. What do you think Dallas should do? Take Azzi Fudd and run with the UConn connection, or trade the pick for multiple assets and accelerate the rebuild? And if you're Chicago, how much would you give up to move from 5 to 1? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let's see how this plays out over the next few months. Because one thing's certain, this draft is going to be a lot more interesting than anyone expected.